Alright, so you read the title correctly. I made the title of this video, and you read it right. We are talking about Marvel Jesus. But not the Marvel Jesus you think of, not Deadpool. We're talking about Marvel and Jesus. Character I chose to connect to Jesus and the Christ-like archetype was Miles Morales. Mainly just because he's one of my favorite characters, also because I think there's a lot of very interesting stuff that is really cool about Miles Morales that not that many people know of, that I can talk about here, and because why not? So, the way I'm going to be doing this is kind of weird because there are 3 Miles Moraleses I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to be splitting them up into different pathways. They all do follow the same storyline for most part for the basic stuff, but for some of the more out there things that Marvel has done, like the comics or in the video games, I will be having to split them up. So we're going to be doing 3 different paths for the Miles Moraleses. The first one, for the comic book, we're beginning calling that path C. So there'll be 1C, 2C, 3C, how many I have to do just for it to make sense for you guys. For the movies, it will be M, and for the games, it will be G. And then we'll also have, no, I won't make it that complicated. We'll just do CMG, comic, movie, video games. That should be simple enough for you guys. Ready? Let's go. So, all these Miles Moraleses start on the same path when they are reborn or have their miraculous birth, similar to Jesus Christ. He was born to the Virgin Mary without original sin, same because Mary didn't have any sin, which made his birth miraculous. For Miles, he is a normal human. He is born with original sin, presumably. They don't really talk much about religion in Marvel, but his birth has nothing to do with original sin for it being considered miraculous or similar to Jesus' birth, but it's because he is reborn as a greater version of himself. He just goes from being this regular kid to being Spider-Man, and that rebirth happens when he's bitten by the radioactive not the radioactive spider, that's Peter Parker. He's been by a genetically engineered radioactive spider that gives him the abilities to turn invisible and create electricity that he ends up calling Venom, which is pretty cool. You see a lot of it in the movies and in the video games. And then from there on out, all the characters kind of have the regular Spider-Man stuff, the villains, all that stuff. And this is our first split off, at least the way I'm going to do this is our first split off. And that is going to be prophecies. We just talked about the miraculous birth, and I'm talking about prophecies. The second corresponds between the two. Now this is what I'm going to be calling 1C, which is like our first split off from the from all 3 of them. And this is only for the comic version of Miles Morales. And this happens in the storyline called Civil War 2, which is completely different than Civil War 1. That's why it's called Civil War 2. Instead of being between Iron Man and Captain America over superheroes revealing their identities and Sokovia Accords and a whole bunch of other stuff that happens in the movie, it is between, I don't remember who, it's between one side of superheroes and another side, which is, the other side is led by Captain Marvel this time. And Captain Marvel is kind of like Captain America in Civil War 1, where she's kind of the antagonist side. And for Captain Marvel, her beliefs on this side is that she wants to use this mutant Ulysses, who has the ability to see in the future, and basically they can see in the future but it's not really that well, so they kind of see broken futures-ish that can kind of happen, or it's not like the full truth of what they're seeing. They're not seeing the entire picture of the future that they can't see. So Ulysses ends up seeing Miles Morales kill Captain America, and Captain Marvel's like, okay, we gotta go stop this now, because Captain Marvel's whole thing is like using Ulysses to stop future crimes from happening, because that's just what she thinks is right, and the other heroes just don't think that's right. So, and that's why they have Civil War. So they go to Miles and they confront him about this. Miles has a complete panic attack, and that leads to something else, another correspondence that I'm going to talk about later. But Miles is prophesied by Ulysses to kill Captain America. And for Jesus, his prophecy, his closest prophecy to this isn't that he kills someone, but is that he dies himself for the greater good of humanity. He dies for our sins. For Miles, it actually ends up coming out that him killing Captain America is good, because it's not actually Captain America, it is a Hydra agent, or Captain America as a double agent for Hydra. So Miles actually killing him is good, and is good for the heroes, because Hydra is actually manipulating everything in Civil War II. So both characters are prophesied to do something for the greater good of humanity, or for the greater good of the people around them. So now going back to the timeline, all three of the Miles that I'm talking about do have friends and companions. For the movie version, it is definitely the people of Harlem. Those are his not his companions, but his followers. So much of Jesus' disciples, all three of them actually have the people of Harlem as their followers. The best example of this is definitely in the video games, Spider-Man Miles Morales. After he falls back to the ground, after he releases the energy from the super reactor, the people see his identity, but they don't like sell him out. They actually defend him from the people, from the news people, as they realize it's just a kid. Similar to the train scene in Spider-Man 3, I think it is, or no, Spider-Man 2. And for Jesus, his followers are actually his disciples. Those are the people you always see at the Sermon on the Mount, the speeches, who just follow him from town to town because they believe in his mission. When it comes to companions, though, Jesus has the 12 apostles, Peter, Judas, who ends up betraying him, but they're all still at one point his friends, even though Judas does end up betraying him. For Miles, is actually the same thing. He has, in the movies, he has Gwen Stacy, Peter B. Parker, Spider-Pig, Penny Parker, Spider-Man Noir. He has a whole bunch of people. In video games, he has MJ, Harry, Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and then in the comics, he just has like everyone basically. There's so many characters I don't even know that he does have, who are his companions and his friends. And it's pretty similar to Jesus, because some of those companions do end up actually betraying him, which leads into my next correspondence in this little pseudo timeline thing, is that they do get betrayed by their friends. For Jesus, he's betrayed by Judas in the garden, as you guys all should probably know, or at least heard of at one point or another. For Miles, this is our 1M, where it's switched off for just the movies. And Across the Spider-Verse, he is betrayed by his friends from the first movie, so that they can let his dad die, because it's a canon event, which for Miles, he doesn't really sit right with, but they kind of just trap him, or they let him get trapped, and they don't do anything to help him, betraying him so that his dad can die. So it's pretty similar to Jesus. It's not super similar, but for Jesus' death, Judas betrays him, leading to his death, and for Miles, he's betrayed, which leads to the death of his dad. We're gonna go back to just all three characters. This is a general correspondence for all three versions of Miles Morales for Jesus, and that is that all three of them show love and they show forgiveness, which is very important. That is something that Jesus is known for. He forgives those who sinned. He forgave Judas, who got him killed before Judas even betrayed him. He was just a very forgiving person, as we see in the Bible. And Miles, he goes and he forgives his uncle, who he even looks up to and is guided by, which is another correspondence. He forgives his uncle for being the prowler and being a thief and a criminal. He forgives in the video games, he forgives Mr. Negative, who's the reason why his dad is dead. At the end of the game, he ends up forgiving him and working with him to help take down Venom. Of course, I want to talk about with his uncle. This is going to be M2, which is only for the movies. in the movies, Miles' uncle ends up dying in the first one, and Miles lives by the good sides of his uncle to inspire him to, or motivate him to do what he does, like to be a hero, to be like the good sides of his uncle. And Jesus, he does everything for God the Father. And he's sent by him. He does everything for God the Father and for us. He's motivated by God the Father. He's guided by God the Father, which is pretty good, or pretty cool similarity between the two. Even though it's Miles' uncle, he does see his uncle as like a second dad. As we do see in the movie, he goes over to his uncle's house or apartment a lot, and just likes to hang out with him, and there's a fatherly bond there, which is pretty similar to Jesus' bond with God the Father. Okay, so we're down to 3 more correspondences, and in Miles' story, they don't really fit in too well, as they are all general, and they apply to all 3 Spider-Man. And that is fighting for justice, dying, and healing others. The best example I can give for healing others for Miles Morales is definitely helping out his community that we see in the video games. Mostly, or the main example I can provide is from the video games. There's a mission where, or a series of missions where the whole purpose of those is to help a member of his community. Well, he's not physically healing someone, like Jesus did with blind people, paraplegics, or like exorcising someone who had a demon. He's still helping them out and healing his community. Same thing in the video games, in his separate solo video game. At the end, when he destroys the reactor, that is actually him healing his community, because without it, his community everyone would have gotten sick from the gases of the reactor, but they also probably would have died because the reactor was unstable and would have exploded. He healed them by protecting them. And throughout the comics, there's various stories you can find of just him helping the people in his community. For fighting for justice, for Miles, it's pretty obvious. He's a superhero, he fights for justice, but I think this is more on this, for this correspondence, it's more on Jesus. How does Jesus fight for justice? And I really think that the best way that Jesus fights for justice is by standing up for when he sees like hypocrisy and stuff like that. Not only does he heal people, and he kind of breaks the barrier with he breaks the barriers with some of the Jewish laws about like being around certain people. He breaks those barriers, which is fighting for justice. He wants equality between the people, but also sometimes he goes to there's instances where he goes to like the high priests and people like that, and he criticizes them for being unjust. For Miles, he doesn't generally. Sometimes he does criticize some people, but I mean, you can watch the movies or everything he's doing. He's doing it for everything he does for the good of the people, for justice. The best example of this in the movies is definitely the whole canon event, system that they use in the second movie, where certain things are just supposed to happen. They're just supposed to let them happen. When the other superheroes do that, Miles is like, we gotta stop this. Even if it's supposed to happen, we can stop it. We are superheroes. That's supposed to be our thing. We stop this stuff. And it just shows his true sense of justice, how he wants to fight for it, kind of like Jesus does. They do it differently, but they're both fighting for the same thing. Alright, for my final correspondence, it is that both Jesus and Miles die. Now this is one where it's more on Miles and it's on Jesus. Everyone knows how Jesus dies. He gets crucified on the cross, he dies, then he resurrects 3 days later. For Miles, it's similar, but it's very different. He doesn't physically die, he metaphorically dies. And that is because Miles doesn't die, but Spider-Man dies. We see this in the video games where when he goes, in one of the parts of the video games, his solo video game, he goes and he fights the Tinker, and he loses, and he has broken ribs and stuff, and he gives up for a bit. He doesn't lose his powers in this instance, but he does give up, and he isn't really Spider-Man for a little bit. In the comic books, there's times where he gets really depressed. Going back to Civil War II in the comics, once they confront him, Captain Marvel, Miles has a panic attack that's so bad that he just like almost reveals his identity and stops being Spider-Man, because he's thinking they're gonna kill him, which leads to him losing his power and Spider-Man basically dying for a little bit, until ironically Captain America just tells him it's okay and that he should just go home, which he ends up doing, and he isn't Spider-Man for a short while. And then that's all 10 correspondences. But the last one I want to add between Jesus and Miles Morales is actually that both of them have this hero archetype. Miles obviously is a superhero, but Jesus, he does everything for the good of the people, for the greater good of people as a whole. He does things that he doesn't need to do, but he does them for people, similar to Miles. He doesn't have to save people. He could use his powers for himself selfishly, but he uses them to save people. And I think we should all try to do that. We should all try to do stuff for other people. We shouldn't be selfish. And yeah, that's really it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Yeah.